Most people believe emotions are something that simply happen to them. Anger rises, anxiety appears, frustration takes over, and the mind reacts before it even has time to think. In that moment, it feels natural to speak quickly, defend yourself, explain, argue, or withdraw. But here is the uncomfortable truth most people never face. The moment you lose control of your emotions, you hand control of yourself to someone else. The person who provokes you controls you. The situation that unsettles you controls you. And the environment that pressures you begins shaping your decisions. Emotional control is not about suppressing feelings. It is about refusing to let them dictate who you are. Many people believe emotional discipline means becoming cold or detached from life. In reality, it means something much more difficult. It means building an identity that remains stable even when your emotions are not. When you do not have this internal stability, every interaction becomes unpredictable. A single comment can ruin your mood. A disagreement can trigger anger. A stressful situation can collapse your confidence. Life becomes a series of emotional reactions rather than intentional actions. The person who controls their emotions, however, operates differently. They are not controlled by the moment. They are guided by internal standards. To understand this more clearly, imagine a man named Daniel. Daniel is intelligent, hardworking, and capable, but he has a problem he rarely notices. His emotional state changes depending on the people around him. When someone criticizes him, he immediately feels the urge to defend himself. When a colleague speaks aggressively, his voice rises to match the tone. When he feels disrespected, his mind becomes consumed with proving himself right. Daniel believes he is standing up for himself, but in reality, he is reacting to pressure. His emotions are steering his behavior. One afternoon at work, Daniel experiences something small that reveals this pattern. A colleague publicly questions one of his decisions during a meeting. The tone is sharp. The room becomes quiet, and all eyes move toward Daniel. His chest tightens. His thoughts accelerate. A dozen responses rush through his mind at once. His instinct tells him to defend himself immediately, to explain why the criticism is unfair. But something inside him hesitates. In that moment, he becomes aware of the reaction forming inside him. This is the moment most people miss. Emotional reactions happen quickly, but they are not instantaneous. There is a small space between the stimulus and the reaction. That space is where emotional discipline begins. Most people allow their emotions to fill that space automatically. The disciplined person trains themselves to step into it consciously. Instead of reacting immediately, they observe the reaction forming inside them. Daniel notices the anger building in his chest. His instinct tells him to interrupt, raise his voice, and correct the accusation. But instead of speaking, he pauses. The pause feels uncomfortable. The room waits. His mind wants to move quickly, but he resists that urge. In that short moment of silence, something important happens. The emotion is still there, but it no longer controls his next action. Emotional control always begins with discomfort. When you refuse to react immediately, your mind experiences tension. The body wants release. It wants expression. Anger wants to speak. Anxiety wants to explain. Fear wants to escape. Discipline means allowing that discomfort to exist without obeying it. This is the first rule of emotional control. You are allowed to feel emotions, but you are not obligated to act on them. Daniel takes a slow breath and answers calmly. Instead of arguing, he acknowledges the criticism and explains his reasoning without raising his voice. The room relaxes. The situation moves forward. What could have become an argument dissolves into a discussion. The difference is not intelligence, strategy, or persuasion. The difference is emotional control. Most people believe emotional control means suppressing emotions entirely. This is not discipline. Suppression only hides emotions temporarily, and hidden emotions eventually return with greater force. Real discipline is different. It is the ability to recognize emotions clearly while refusing to let them control your behavior. The disciplined person does not pretend anger does not exist. They simply refuse to let anger decide what happens next. To reach this level of control, your identity must change. Most people think of themselves as emotional beings who occasionally try to be disciplined. The disciplined person reverses this relationship. They see themselves as a disciplined individual who occasionally experiences emotions. The identity becomes stable. The emotions become temporary. This shift sounds simple, but it requires training. Emotional control is not built during calm moments. It is built during pressure. Every uncomfortable situation becomes an opportunity to strengthen discipline. When someone provokes you, you practice restraint. When frustration appears, you practice composure. When anxiety rises, you practice stillness. Discomfort becomes training rather than something to escape. Daniel begins to notice this pattern in his life. In conversations, he becomes aware of how quickly emotions attempt to influence his reactions. Sometimes it is irritation. Sometimes it is insecurity. Sometimes it is the desire to prove himself right. Each time, the same internal process begins. The emotion appears. The instinct pushes him to react. And then he pauses. At first, the pause feels unnatural. Silence feels awkward. The urge to explain himself feels overwhelming. But slowly, something changes. The more often he refuses to react immediately, the weaker the emotional impulse becomes. The mind begins to understand that emotions are signals, not commands. This is the second rule of emotional control. Emotions are information, not instructions. Anger may signal that a boundary has been crossed. Anxiety may signal uncertainty. Frustration may signal that something needs attention. But these signals do not require immediate action. They require awareness. When you treat emotions as instructions, they control your behavior. When you treat them as information, you regain control of yourself. The disciplined person observes emotions with curiosity rather than obedience. They ask what the emotion reveals, but they decide independently how to respond. Over time, Daniel notices a surprising change in how people interact with him. Conversations that once escalated into arguments remain calm. Provocations lose their effect. People who once attempted to pressure him begin speaking more carefully. Without saying anything directly, his composure changes the dynamics of every interaction. This happens because emotional reactions create predictable patterns. When someone knows they can provoke you into anger, they gain leverage. When someone knows criticism will make you defensive, they gain influence. But when your reactions become controlled and deliberate, that leverage disappears. This is the third rule of emotional control. Predictable reactions create vulnerability. Controlled responses create authority. The person who cannot be easily provoked becomes difficult to manipulate. Emotional discipline also changes your relationship with discomfort. Most people spend their lives avoiding uncomfortable emotions. They avoid criticism because it creates insecurity. They avoid confrontation because it creates anxiety. They avoid difficult conversations because they fear emotional tension. Avoidance may reduce discomfort temporarily, but it weakens emotional resilience. The disciplined person does the opposite. They move toward discomfort deliberately. They allow themselves to experience situations that challenge their composure. Every uncomfortable moment becomes an opportunity to practice control. Over time, situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. Daniel begins applying this approach outside of work as well. In personal conversations, he listens longer before responding. In stressful situations, he slows his breathing and observes his reactions. When frustration appears, he allows it to exist without expressing it impulsively. Each moment of restraint strengthens his sense of control. Gradually, the emotional landscape of his life begins to change. Situations that once triggered immediate reactions now feel slower and clearer. Instead of being pulled into emotional currents, he observes them from a distance. His actions become deliberate rather than reactive. This transformation does not eliminate emotions. Anger still appears. Anxiety still rises during uncertainty. Frustration still exists when things go wrong. But the difference is that these emotions no longer dictate behavior. They become temporary experiences rather than controlling forces. The final rule of emotional control is identity. Discipline cannot rely on temporary motivation or occasional effort. It must become part of how you see yourself. The disciplined person does not ask whether they should control their emotions in a difficult moment. They assume it as a non-negotiable standard. When your identity includes emotional discipline, reactions become intentional. Silence becomes comfortable. Composure becomes natural. Situations that once triggered chaos begin to feel manageable. The world does not become less challenging, but your internal response becomes stable. Daniel eventually realizes that emotional control is not about dominating other people. It is about refusing to be dominated by your own impulses. When emotions appear, he observes them without surrendering to them. When pressure increases, he slows down rather than reacting faster. When tension rises, he remains composed. In time, this composure becomes visible to others, not through words or explanations, but through behavior. The way he speaks remains calm. The way he responds remains measured. The way he handles pressure remains controlled. Without announcing it, he has built something rare. Emotional control is quiet power. It is the ability to remain stable when situations become unstable. It is the discipline to choose actions rather than surrendering to impulses. It is the understanding that emotions may visit, but they do not decide who you are. Most people spend their lives trying to control external situations. They try to control other people's opinions, reactions, and behaviors. The disciplined person focuses somewhere else entirely. They focus on the only thing that can truly be controlled: themselves.